In the featherweight division, the finals of the Road to UFC tournament, we have one of the stars of the season. It's the Korean Tiger, Jeong Yeong Lee, taking on China's Yi Zha, the former WLF4's featherweight champ. Is Yi Zha, and when it comes to fighters of WLF4s, I never know what we're going to get. I mean, I went through like some recent fighters. Yi Zha trains with Summit Energy, so that is a guy that spent time there. He also trains with Rongju, who is in and out of the UFC pretty quickly, but another young prospect that if he can bring it together, Rongju's boxing is quite good. And then another fighter that I could think of out of that organization, Wu Yanan. She was out of WLF4s, but you never know what you're going to get because records are very, very padded. And for Yi Zha, coming into the season, he was 19-3, and he was a pretty big underdog in his debut, and he ends up going out there using his complete game plan, gets the win over Kizuki Sasu, and he ends up getting a submission win. His last time out, he gets a split decision win over Matsushima, and if you consider for Yi Zha, one of those more well-rounded type of guys that is in this tournament. He will utilize his wrestling. He takes long shots from the outside, kind of ducks his head and tucks it, and that's great because he doesn't tend to get submitted out of all of those takedown attempts. And he's beating guys in the way that you want to see a guy with a record like that, beating them on the regional scene. The flip side is he wasn't fighting anybody good with WLF4s, and he wasn't necessarily seasoned against upper-level competition, where, by comparison, Jeong Yeong Lee, a guy who at 9-1 was facing good levels of opposition over with Road FC. He was the Road FC featherweight champ, reigning, and he defended it against Choi, and if you consider it, the only loss that he has on his record was a decision loss back in 2017. But Lee was an interesting guy coming into this tournament, like a few others, because he had almost a 3-year layoff from being the Road FC champ, just going all violence on everybody over with Road FC, to then fighting in this tournament. So he's only a slight favorite when he made that debut against Ji Bin. But you consider it, Matt, I mean, 36-second submission win in that fight, and then he beats Liu Kai, 42-second knockout. Like, he's just continue that dominance that he had even when he was a champ with Road FC.
Lee reminds me a lot of Chris Duarte for the Indiana Pacers. Much more last season than this year. But when you think about guys who spent 4 years in college who then make the transition to the league, they don't really have those growing pains that a lot of other rookies would have. And for Lee, he does seem to have a very educated, mature, I guess, game plan is the word that I'm looking for, because his striking is well put together and he doesn't leave a ton of openings for counter shots. The one thing that I do worry about with Lee, though, and I was just thinking about this, when Alexander Volkanovski fought Max Holloway for the third time, he got on the inside of his range, didn't let Max Holloway's range be a factor, and he made it a hand speed contest because his hand speed was so much better than Holloway's. He was able to get from point A to point B a lot faster. The only thing I worry about with Lee is he does put a lot of power behind his shots, and sometimes he telegraphs them a little bit. Now, if he does fight a really good counter striker, can move on the outside, draw out some of those attacks, I think he could get countered against some of the more high-low fighters in the division, but I'm talking about him fighting up the division, like borderline ranked fighters at this point. I don't think Yi Zha is going to be the type of fighter who can take advantage of some of those holes, but I have really enjoyed what I've seen out of Lee up until this point. They've been quick finishes. He's been able to demonstrate at least grappling knowledge. I wouldn't say he is a grappler by trade, but if he has you hurt, he can go for chokes, he can go for armbars and whatnot, but his boxing on the outside really is the X factor, and really is the thing that stands out the most. His ability to throw in combination, throw the right hand as a lead shot, not only as a follow-up to his jab. It's just really nice to see a guy who is, I guess, on his way to making his UFC debut, be able to have those types of skills.
One nice thing, if you're just listening to us and you've never seen these two guys fight, the tape's out there. Like, you can find a ton of Yi Zha tape. You don't have to just take the Chinese characters and put them on the internet and find it that way. You can, or you can find it on YouTube, and a lot of Road FC fights you can find on YouTube, on different social media platforms. But for the Korean Tiger, you look at his last decision win. It was when he won the belt back in 2018 against Choi. In that one, first round, somewhat competitive. He kind of pulls away with his striking. Second round, he beats him up and brutalizes his left eye. Third round, I looked at it and it says decision. I watched the fight. I thought, but they blow the horn. Like, he must win that fight. By TKO, it was like the last second they blew the horn. The referee was going in. He was beating the brakes off of Choi in that fight. And then he goes out there against his former teammate, Hae Jin Park and knocks him out in 10
like
seconds.
Dominic Reyes OSP. Shout out. That was a weird finish to that.
Yeah, it was really, really crazy. But again, like, I look at this matchup, I would say Yi Zha has the wrestling advantage in this matchup. The scary thing is, we talked about it in the bantamweight division. You look at it, I mean, Kazama was able to get a win on this season over Karimwali. And in that matchup, he beats him by decision. That was the same guy that knocked out Yi Zha almost 2 years ago. And now he at least was competing in the bantamweight division of this tournament. So for Yi Zha, his striking defense can kind of cause him problems. He kind of fights like one of those UFC fighters when you're on the outside at the start and you don't know how to glove tap. So you just kind of like start moving around. He holds his hands incredibly high and backs up, and he leaves his body exposed. He leaves his legs out. He takes long shots. His striking very much is like a guy like Jesus Aguilar, who's on the bottom of this card, where kind of throws everything out there to try and then get the takedown to close the action. So I look at the matchup, Matt. I mean, I also look, we threw this one out there in a poll on Instagram. 55% of the Instagram respondents going with Jeong Yeong Lee to get the win. 45% going with Yi Zha, which surprised the hell out of me because Lee is a pretty big favorite in the matchup. So we'll have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprised to us as they are to you. I think it's going to be far more skewed to Lee over on Tapology. I'm going to say over under 75% Lee.
I think it'll be over.
I think it's going to be over. Yeah, it's over. So 822 total votes, 83% Lee, 70% by knockout for the 17% that have Yi Zha, 55% by decision, 26% by submission. I think Jeong Yeong Lee continues this kind of reign of dominance with his striking. I think he has a definite size advantage in the matchup, and I think he's going to come in heavier when it comes into the cage. You saw these two guys square off when they squared them off. It was in Abu Dhabi after the semifinals, before the finals, and Lee looked a lot bigger in that picture. So, again, for me, I like Jeong Yeong Lee. I like the fact that, you know, he can kind of... I think at least he can kind of withstand some of the grappling, and I think he can outstrike Yi Zha in this one.
I have Lee in the matchup, but I could see Yi Zha winning by decision. I could see his work rate and just his ability to go for takedowns and get his head out of trouble being to his benefit. Because if Lee can't hit you and damage you, it is going to be difficult for him to rack up some of those points if he's not threatening with submissions on the mat. So I could see a world where Yi Zha is able to use his wrestling to his benefit, but I agree with you. I do think Lee has such a decided advantage in his striking that he'll be able to use that to his advantage.
The BJJ black belt, the striker, is Jeong Yeong Lee. Both of us going with him to get the win in the featherweight division. We have lightweight up next. Anshul Jubli taking on Jeka Saragih. It should be a great fight over there. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.